Hi, everybody. I'm Tia Kansara. Welcome to the Replenisher Speaker Series, where we have a number of experts exploring climate action in innovative and super exciting ways. Today marks the second day of London Climate Action Week. LCOR 2020 brings together leading experts and policymakers to drive the national and international climate policy response. We prioritize the green recovery with four very distinct themes. The first is a green and fair, resilient recovery. The second is a roadmap to COP26. The third, a sustainable and net zero London. And the fourth, whole society climate mobilization. Join us as we explore Peter BENHUR's NYEKO's work to create sustainable energy for all. So before we begin, and to invite our audience to share some of their thoughts, I've got some particular questions that I'd like to share with you. The first is, are you using renewable energy in your energy mix, either at home or work in your life? And tell us how, if you are. What's your energy efficiency initiative that you might be taking at home? We believe that climate action is about also being energy resilient. And of course, across the world, we've got a number of really interesting challenges. So without further ado, our guest today, Peter, is a co-founder of Mandulis Energy, which is a clean tech social enterprise focused on developing and deploying new technologies and approaches to deliver energy that is affordable, reliable, sustainable, and capable of driving economic development. I find his work absolutely incredible in urban and rural agricultural communities, and especially in the emerging markets. The co-products of Mandulis Energy include clean cooking fuel, sustainable low carbon industrial heating solutions. And alongside renewable energy, Peter has worked in carbon finance, in education, in transport, in logistics, and he has a master's in engineering and aerospace engineering from the University of Bristol. He's an avid ballroom dancer, who knew, equestrian and thespian, and speaks Arabic, French, and Luo. Without further ado, please welcome Peter. Hi, Peter.
Hello, Tia. How's it going? Good evening.
Yeah, really good. Whereabouts are you at the moment?
I'm in Kampala, Uganda, in East Africa.
Kampala, Uganda. Wow, this is exciting. It's been such a big pleasure to come across your work. A coach of mine and a dear friend, Linda, put us in touch. And since then, I think we've just had such a great opportunity to really delve into some of the big questions of our time. And who knew we have energy in common? So tell me a little bit about your journey. How did you get to this place, and what was it that sort of really inspired you to work on this? Because I think you've just got this incredibly broad background, and you've been sort of, building and weaving this sort of global person work and effort, and I just find it so incredibly inspiring. So please share, how did you start your journey, and what triggered it?
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tia. So my journey actually began in a little village in northern Uganda many years ago, and I lived in a village which had no electricity, and it was normal. That was life. Great memories, climbing up trees and so on. Moving on along, I ended up, studying engineering at Bristol in the UK. And while studying engineering at Bristol, in aerospace engineering, we worked a lot on energy that, could power aerospace vehicles, from the energy we all know, which is, come from fossil fuels, but also once you leave the Earth and go to space, you realize that a lot of what you work with is actually quite, sustainable, such as hydrogen gas, that gets your rockets up there. Once you're in outer space, you're using a lot of solar. And after many years away from Uganda, over a couple of decades, coming back, I realized a lot of what I had learned, about how it was possible to work with what we have in an area to create what people need. And in that case, I was looking at the duality between, sending a vehicle up to, say, Mars, for example, or the moon, and having to generate all your resources over there to enable you to come back to Earth. And really, when I thought of my little village, it was probably not too much different in terms of energy anyway, because, just like the Martian surface, you had no access to electricity, no access to clean cooking, and so I thought, well, why not? And what I really looked at first was solar, and how the sun in Uganda, where I'm born, where I live now, there's so much sunlight from every acre acre in Uganda. You can basically generate, easily over 250 kilowatts of electricity, and from every square meter, you can generate enough electricity to power a home in Kensington. So I'm like, wow, that's definitely something we could do. So coming out here, I realized there was more than just solar we could work with. We could work with solar, obviously. We could work with solar, photovoltaic solar. We could look at other types of solar, such as concentrated solar. But also, more interestingly, what was so real about Uganda, as it is in most parts of Africa and other parts of the emerging markets, is most people who live off grid and have no access to electricity are actually farmers, and they have a lot of agricultural waste, which could actually be used to generate energy, turning husks, shells, and cobs, which take a while to decompose and can't actually be used, in the fields directly. So those could actually be used to make, methane and hydrogen and so on, and those could work in engines and generate electricity, or they could be turned into pellets and briquettes and be used as a clean cooking fuel, or be turned, into a biochar that could be used as an industrial heating fuel, or could be used as, an input for enhancing soils so farmers could do better. So that's how it all basically went. So it's great to be back, home where I was born, and it's great to be working in some of those villages where I had my very early years.
I think it is in our childhood that many of these seeds are actually planted. I remember, just the experience of being in a village in India for my mom, for example, my father, because he was born in East Africa, and them talking about these almost unbelievable situations where energy was not available or the lights would switch off. I remember our first trip to India, in the middle of the evening, maybe about 7 or 8 p.m., and all of a sudden all lights have gone off. And I was, it's such a shock because you don't expect it. And, we were coming from the UK where in my life, in the experiences that I'd had up until the age of about 7, I'd never experienced a blackout. And so it was such an intriguing experience. And I thought that, wait, hold on a second. All the electricity has gone where? Like, what do you mean that there isn't a consistent supply of energy? We almost take it for granted that it's there always, but it's not. And it's created and there's an infrastructure. And I feel that this relationship between, what in rural environments is, a desire to have, is a sort of, an everyday thing for many of us around the world, without the consideration that some people in the world may not actually have access to that. So that is, it's such an interesting trigger that started as a seed in your life and took you all the way to and through university, into practice, into engineering, into creating the resources that you have. What have been some of the challenges for you? Because it's such an interesting thing to go from a kind of engineering that we, really, that take us to the stars, right? Like this idea that we're interstellar. I've been watching Star Trek Discovery on Netflix. And, one of the things that I've been having a lot of fun with is all of the science, just understanding the science behind the maneuvering around space, the spore drives, and jumping from one place in the actual multiverse to another. So it really is something that can give us an incredible sight for something that is discoverable but yet in discovery, and that's the position that we're in. we're not really ever quite there at knowing all, but we're always in this sense of experimentation and evolving that that relationship that we have with what we want to create. So it's such an interesting mix of the personal experience to what is effectively the engineering of the gods, really, like the idea that you can go beyond our own reality into what often we look at as that sort of intergalactic unknowable.
Indeed, indeed. And what's quite interesting is when you fly over, Africa or parts of India, and South America, it feels quite interesting because when you're down on the ground looking up, especially on the equator where you've got the stars are shining brightly and it's so very clear, you can pretty much see every constellation, and they feel so close. You feel you can reach up and grab one. But at the same time, I'll try to share my screen to kind of show everyone a photo which I'm sure they have seen before, and it's pretty. Can you see that photo? Is it visible? Don't know if it is. Hello, can you hear me? Let me look at.
I think it normally sort of like moves up the screen. Let me know.
Yeah, but well, what I was basically trying to get to was, as you fly over most of the world at night, you pretty much see exactly what we see when we look up. You see areas where you've got a lot of electricity, and and there's this light shining at night. Then you see areas where there's just darkness, and that's what you see when you look up higher as well. And that's really interesting because it's what really inspires. It's wherever you are in the world, you can basically look up and see the stars. It would be great if the stars could also look down, and see the light shining everywhere around the world, just as much. Because when you think about it, it's we've got over 1 billion people around the world not having electricity, and you kind of compare someone in the UK and someone in sub-Saharan Africa, you've probably got one person in the UK using the same amount of electricity in a year as over 60 people in sub-Saharan Africa. And so it's quite interesting having kind of lived in both those areas, trying to compare them and see that.
Would you expand the view on your presentation so we can get a bit more of a?
Can you see it all now?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah. Yes.
I think it's really fascinating for me when we see these sorts of images to see what is and isn't connected up on the grid, and the assumption is that we need to have this crazy grid across like a carpet all across the world. What do you feel about that?
I think, well, I mean, it's not possible to have it all connected to each other. There are areas where you will only have smaller grids, microgrids, and there are areas where you will have, solar home systems, and so on and so forth. I like the idea of mini grids and microgrids because it allows someone in an area which may be too far away from the main grid to be connected to electricity, which is productive, which is useful for not just lighting, but also useful for other things that electricity is used for, useful for transport. If you live in London, I mean, you've got the underground that runs, on electricity. If, of course, in some of these, countries, you don't have an underground or much electrical transport going on, but that's an opportunity. And you think of everything else, which, kind of moves people on, adding value to people's crops, and helping them get out of poverty. That's something that electricity is useful for. Helping, people who live in, fishing communities have access to cold storage, and for their fish and ice making plants and so on and so forth. So there's so much that electricity is useful for. What happens is when a village is, 500 miles away from the nearest grid, you find it costs a lot more to connect that village to the grid than it does to just build a small grid where that village is. And that's really what we see as the opportunity, kind of going forward. And it's not really so much a sad story, but rather, a story of hope and a story of possibilities, and a story of hope possibility where, people around the world will be able to benefit from, more people having access to value addition and, and electricity where they are based. If you look at this next slide, it shows you a part of Uganda that's up in the northeast, and that's the Starry Night Sky I'm talking about as you look up. And it would be nice to get to a point where, looking down, you can see across the world, as lit up as such. And it is definitely an opportunity. So this photo is from a place called Kidepo National Park in the northeast of Uganda. It's, if anyone's watched The Lion King, it feels like, going into that kind of space. But as you look around, you find, cities are growing. More and more people are now going to be living in cities, and it's important to have access to affordable energy in cities, to keep them running, as well as in the rural areas. And it's you see the little boy there with his torch, trying to be Darth Vader or whoever from Star Wars, and or Luke Skywalker. And it's electricity allows the world to be connected, in this digital age where everyone is online pretty much.
It's almost like the base layer, the basic thing, the basic resource that we can have that can give us access to even more things. And it's, if we think in terms of just smart technology, somebody on LinkedIn today shared an image of Forbes magazine, and it had $1 billion industry for Nokia. Like, who's going to take down the giant 2007 darlings in 13 years? Nokia phone industry? Like, just in 13 years, and literally a couple of months after that, the image of the work that Nokia had done, the image of Nokia was like the biggest company in mobile technology in the world. And then all of a sudden it was like, who, Nokia? Couple of months later, and they were never to know that Apple was about to launch a smartphone. And it's like, when you get the kind of image that you get with all the different kinds of technologies that it took to create the platform of the iPhone, and how that technology, from military technology to academic technology, and all of this coalition that had come together to develop something that we now call a smartphone, which, if you look at the engineering of phones 10 years ago, you could see them, and now if you were to open them, you need incredible technology to even see the nano technology that now inhabits our phone. So it's a very interesting shift from what we thought was the system to what could be the system, what could really develop into something that really helps us identify with the challenges that we have today. I think in terms of the pandemic, when you mentioned cities, one of the things that came up a lot in my mind was, really, are you sure about that? I mean, we talk about like the UN sort of figures being, by X amount of time, there are going to be billions of people under the poverty line. So that's one. The second is the number of people that are going to be climate refugees. So moving across the world because it's too hot or the climate is extremely harsh, whether it's anthropogenic and it is because of, clearing up and deforestation and a variety of other measures locally or not, it's as if these mass groups of people are going to be moving around the world, very much like other refugees that have also in some way suffered political trauma that is rooted in climate trauma. And it's like there is this shift that's going to occur. And so these, whether it's the wave of the pandemic with the question of whether cities are even going to be applicable, considering, many of the people in our lives are probably trying to find ways of not being locked down in, a small apartment on the 40th floor of a building or 20th floor of a building. That's just not something that we want in terms of our mental health and bridging the external and indoor, that kind of the division between the indoor outdoor, the relationship with the outdoors. So it's really interesting in terms of what resources a city is going to need. And if, of course, countries like, say, India, and a number of years ago, I remember seeing a stat that was if, by, I think it was by 2050, we are going to expect 40 million people to be going from rural areas to urban areas. And where are they going to live? I've totally botched that up, by the way. I don't think that was the stat, but it was shocking when I read it. I think there's way more people than that, but I still think that there is this sort of expectation that we want something to look a particular way. And I think what's happening is the solutions for a local environment which doesn't have a grid that's kind of connected with a lifestyle that is digital, equally in a very particular method of living, whatever modern means, is almost like the cell of a particular lifestyle. And I'm wondering and curious about how that the cell of this consumer mentality, highly energy dense environment can actually still be something that we want to create, or has the pandemic been one amongst many of the opportunities for us to see it differently? And if that is the case, then how can these communities in rural environments leapfrog us? That was a big ramble, sorry.
Oh no, great, awesome. It really makes sense when you think about it. People are moving to the city, obviously, and they're looking for a certain type of lifestyle, and that lifestyle is, whether pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, it's still energy. It needs a lot of energy, and depends on that energy to have everything moving on. So if we're to think of a scenario where people could actually start moving the opposite direction, people who are in the cities, and living in crowded conditions in the city, living in conditions where they're not able to earn the money they need to lead the lifestyle they aspire to. There's actually an opportunity there by taking, dense and productive energy production to the rural areas. You find it's possible to do a whole leapfrog, and go to a rural area, make sure there's fast internet, there's the energy to power, access to that fast internet, make sure there's the energy that's needed to kind of enable factories that people might want to work at that are based in the industrial areas of the city. So if a factory was able to get access to energy at prices that were more affordable in the rural area than they were in the city, they would most likely consider moving closer to the source of the raw materials. And if that happened, then the young people who would have moved to work in the factories for that job security, for that lifestyle, would actually move the other direction back to the rural areas. And there would be a saving in there. The factories would save on transportation costs, kind of getting all that raw material to the city, and kind of carrying the waste with it. So that's kind of really interesting there, because you have, when now the industries can move back to the rural areas, the industries can move closer to the source of the raw material, the jobs can move back there as well, and lives can start growing, and kind of communities can start growing around that. And it becomes really, really interesting, because when people are back, in the more scenic areas where that they probably call home, and are more comfortable at it with their families around them, things like mental health would even be much better there, and access to accommodation, access to food, and access to sustainable and dignified livelihood becomes a lot more affordable. And it's the challenge now is basically it's a challenge to people in business going, all right, focus on innovation and figure out how to move closer to the source of production. So you do your validation of the source of production, so you can move closer to the source of the labor. If it's a labor-intensive, industry, and you take everything from the trainings and the learnings and experience generation, all to where people actually are based in the rural areas, it becomes a lot more interesting. The carbon footprint of whatever is produced drops lower. The risk of having these climate, refugees reduces as well. Because now, if you think of a country like Uganda, for example, out of all the energy that's used in the country, over 90% of the energy used comes from trees. So basically, if you look at all the energy, if you think of electricity, that's less than 10%. Electricity and fossil fuels, for cars and so on and so forth. Literally, you're talking about 10%. The rest of 90% is basically firewood and charcoal, and that's driven by the fact that the urban areas are growing, and it becomes a very interesting thing there. So ultimately, moving people back to the rural areas, attracting them to move there by making things easier and more exciting, becomes a really good way to basically go.
I think it's really fascinating, because part of our conversation is almost going towards that decarbonizing energy, and the other is de-urbanizing cities. And I didn't think we were going to be talking about that, which is really intriguing, in that we look at cities today, cities have been sprawling, developing, organizing themselves into increasingly high serendipity machines, effectively, where you can actually really have the opportunity to connect with so many people coming together. And I think Professor Michael Batty from the Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis at UCL would say this, that the city is, and London was the first place that a wireless signal was sent from and to. So the idea of Wi-Fi began with one particular spot. It's actually around the corner. It's in Bank, around the corner from the BT building. Funnily, there's a plaque there that that is the exact location that the idea and the concept of Wi-Fi even existed. So I think what's intriguing for me is, on the one level, how do you decarbonize the energy sector? Of course, with the ratio of whether it is renewable energy and non-renewables. And I think there's a really good opportunity there. Another question, how do you de-urbanize to the extent where cities can actually still generate their own energy, instead of expecting larger swathes of land and larger supply chains that can be disrupted, whether it is blizzards and storms and or pandemics and various other reasons? I think there's some really interesting exploration there, I think.
No, definitely. It's, sustainable living um, is quite crucial. The way cities are going in general. It's important to figure out how to make sure whatever exists in an ecosystem can be made use of as effectively and efficiently as possible. Thinking about circular economies, thinking about, not having the concept of waste, and instead thinking about the concept of residues, which can be valorized, and reused and upcycled and so on and so forth. So that's kind of one way of looking at it, and looking at it and looking at synergies that can be worked with. So people are looking at options of putting solar on buildings, solar on roads and sidewalks and so on and so forth. There's of course waste energy from the sewage systems and so on into methane, biomethane, and then even waste energy from urban waste through everything from gasification to pyrolysis as well. So there's actually a lot that can be done there. With regards to energy generation, which doesn't necessarily involve either coal or nuclear. And there's also a lot that can be done with some of the new technologies out there, such as hydrogen and so on. So it's kind of a case of bringing together new technologies with the idea of making sure nothing is thrown away, everything is used again. And when you reuse all waste or find a use for it in a different form, and you bring that together with encouraging innovation and scaling up some of the new technologies which are being developed out there, it gives you that interesting way of coming to terms with it from the energy point of view. It's also possible to do that from other points of view beyond just energy, going to food, going to accommodation, and there's like things that can be done there, and going towards the whole idea of is it possible to redevelop parts of the city without relocating the people who live there already. And so looking at the idea of, could it be possible to make the idea of gentrification be instead something which doesn't take people away from where they've grown up and their way of life, but rather brings people together, by making it affordable, by making buildings, be able to generate passive income, as being buildings that generate energy as well, and that energy feeding into the grid. There's so much that can be done there, and the technology is already there. It's just basically a case of getting the people on the side of business, to really get interested in it, and then also, the regulators around the world to put in the enabling environments to enable things like net metering to happen, to enable, interesting instruments on the financial side to happen, where mortgages could be linked to some of these new and novel concepts. It is possible. I think in the next few years we may even see pilots springing up, and the opportunity now. That's why I'm really excited about villages. Is you can try all this out in a village. You can go to a new village and try out all these new ideas. Electric cars. To net metering, to all that. You can do that in a mini grid setting and test it out, and redevelop that rural environment, and then take those learnings, and they can feed the data into the studies you need to basically redo the cities and get the cities to be more sustainable and more affordable, and better places to live in, and then better for the environment in general. So it's basically this interesting duality where I see the rural areas and the areas that are currently seen as places where there is lack. That's actually where you can go there, implement the best in class with regards to technology, try it out, make it work. People will welcome it. If I haven't had any electricity, I welcome the best technology you bring to me. I won't need, to go through a culture change, to shift from one type of electricity to another, because I don't have one before. If I've never had any transportation, you bring me electric vehicles, I'll go for it because it's the first car I've ever come across. If I've never had a phone and now you bring me a smartphone, I'll go for it. If I've never used a credit card and now you bring me some interesting smartphone-based mobile money solution, I'll use that because that's the norm. So the opportunity right now is to actually go to those dark spots on that map I showed earlier and really implement everything which is avant-garde, everything which is at the forefront of technology, and use it for development. And develop those areas, but also develop the learnings that are needed to really enable us to begin to think about how to redevelop some of these urban areas that it's about time we redevelop. If you think about it, cities built at the end of the 19th century, rebuilding them takes a lot of work. But if we figure out, how to do it in these rural areas, I think there's a thing or two we can probably learn there.
I loved what you said about the innovation. Also, like the challenge I think that we sort of feel when we're evolving and getting even more involved in this kind of energy debate. There was some research that came out a couple of years back. I'm talking about 6 years ago now at UCL, led by Professor Paul Eakin at UCL's Institute for Sustainable Resources, and we wrote a paper together. And the idea of the paper was, how might we create heat in homes using fuel cells and hydrogen in the future for the purpose of securing low carbon heat. And in the paper, we really identified a variety of different sort of uses for decarbonizing the economy. It's one of those things that you end up doing at university that you're like, huh? But yeah, I shared that in the post, and I shared the article as well, so that people can actually read that. I think what's really curious for me is, if I may just sort of put my eco-futurist hat on for a second, it was, imagine going from no phones to smartphones, like in one leap, from no phone, like you've never seen a phone before, or you've seen that there's something there, but it's not really part of your day. And then all of a sudden, you're like socializing this technology into a culture that's never had that kind of level of connection or tech use in their life. I mean, what does that do? What does that do to communities in rural environments? Like, how is that even as an experience? I almost can't imagine it.
Yeah, no, it is real and it is happening. What's interesting is, young people from across countries, across continents, are very connected. I'm talking about people in school, and they're connected to the media. They know that smartphones exist. Their parents, their families may be living in these rural areas. Opportunity from COVID in many African countries where, it is actually the norm for public funded schools, government funded schools to be boarding schools. So I'd say over half of all state school, children in Africa, and are studying in boarding schools. So now with COVID, they've all had to go home and to the rural areas where they come from. They spend the ages of 5 to 18, 19, 75% of their time at the boarding school. And, they leave the village, go to the boarding school, get an education, go to university, leave that rural life to aspire to a life ahead. But now with COVID, everyone just have to go back home and spend the whole year at home. If you think about it, the average family has spent more time with their children than they would probably, in 10 years of school in 1 year. That's really interesting. Think about the growth, think about the bonding, think about, the healing and all the rest of that. But at the same time, as the grounding happens, as they sit around the hearth, as people do in rural areas and tell stories, and as my dear grandmother, did with us when we were younger. It's children learn a lot, but at the same time, when these children go back to rural areas, they know that smartphones exist and they aspire to having them. But now, if you have at the same time during this opportunity, mini-grids springing up, electricity generation springing up in these places, industries moving to rural areas, suddenly these young people are now the ones, teaching their parents how to use the smartphone. And so there's a transfer of knowledge, from the young to the old, and a transfer of wisdom from the old to the young. You get more sustainable communities as a result of that. So it's actually a very exciting opportunity for technology to actually be a tool to actually ground communities and make communities more sustainable beyond just the economic, but also at a family level and mindful level. Yeah.
I think there are solutions like the fuel cells, for example, making them at home from methane, from agricultural out product, right? Like that being the in product for the gas that's then created for whatever else, and then the storage of it. So when it comes to the technology is there. What I find really quite difficult is this trilemma that you talk about, which is affordability, access, and reliability. How do you, could you tell us a little bit more about that? And where are the opportunities in the actual energy sector where you feel tackles this trilemma?
So I'll talk about it from the point of view of what we're doing right now in rural areas. So if you think about a place like Uganda, a place like other parts of Africa, people in urban areas are connected to the national grids, and they usually pay around, I'd say, less than 20 pence per kilowatt hour per unit of electricity. And when you go to the rural areas, so that's households, in the rural areas, the opportunities that people have to access electricity are limited, first of all. And so those who can might put in a diesel generator, and you find that that costs probably twice or three times as much. If they have access to solar home systems, if you think about the actual amount of electricity they can use, it becomes quite expensive, probably 5 to 10 times as much. And that's just enough for lighting, phone charging. It's not even enough to kind of run the masts that are needed to have high-speed internet. So now, at the same time, people in these rural areas earn so much less than people in the urban areas. So if I'm earning in the rural area 5 times less than someone in the urban area, why should I pay 5 times more for the same electron? If I'm a factory in the urban area and I'm paying, around 10 pence per kilowatt hour, if I go to the rural area and have to use a diesel genset, why should I pay 3 times as much for electricity? It means automatically the areas that are already not doing that well economically, that where earnings are low, where microeconomies are not really flourishing, where crops are sold at harvest, unprocessed at a minimum price, where that cycle of poverty is just whirling away. When you think about it that way, it pushes you to think, okay, great, you've got to find a way to make energy in the areas where people earn less. I mean, it just comes down to equity. If you earn 5 times less, we should find a way through innovation to make you pay 5 times less for electricity, unless we find a way to improve your income through the kind of electricity we're actually giving you access to. So what we do now is, we work with in areas where farmers exist. So we give value to waste. That waste is given a value. It's actually turned into electricity. So farmers can earn from that waste. That waste is turned into kind of a clean cooking fuel. our farmers earn from that waste as well. And now, so their incomes are going up as part of our energy solution. So that's kind of very interesting on the affordability side, because they are able to, have more money to actually spend. But then secondly, we really make sure we do all we can to continuously try to bring the price of electricity down. It's crucial that the electricity we supply in these rural areas can be sold to households, to families, at the very least at par with the electricity in the urban areas. And that's just the first step. So, kind of from the business models we work with, from, the kind of technologies we try to put in place, and by connecting with, our own past in engineering and with our colleagues in engineering in the UK and elsewhere around the world, as I said earlier, we try our very best to continue pushing the forefronts of technologies in these rural areas to keep bringing that cost down, and then making sure that we don't have to keep running back as an industry to the public sector for subsidies. It's important that on one side, incomes in rural areas go up through having electricity that is, affordable, electricity that is reliable and there all the time, electricity that is productive and can be used for economic development, can be used for, creating jobs. And at the same time, making sure we choose technologies that don't just take from that ecosystem, such as a dam would. With a dam, I kick you all out, I put my dam, done. But if I go for agricultural waste to energy, the greater the energy system grows, the more income the community around gets, because there's a correlation there, because the more they grow crops, the more their waste is sold to make energy. It's really interesting. So that makes an interesting cycle there. So we then can move from, a vicious cycle of poverty, to a virtuous cycle of prosperity. And that's the move that we feel is possible. And that's a move that we really encourage. And that's what we are glad to find ourselves doing, where we know that over a 10-year period, when we have a power plant running, or over a 20-year period when we have a power plant running on the grid, the number of families, for every megawatt that we would install, you're looking at thousands of farmers earning from that. It's really important. When that money goes back into that community, into that ecosystem, everyone benefits. All the other businesses in the city can now go there. People selling iPhones can go sell iPhones in there. Even a cinema can go to that little village where that little boy was, and show Star Wars, so that he's not just dreaming about it. And the aspirations can now be more equitable. The aspirations can be more sustainable, and the possibilities can be more endless. Because when you're able to reach out to the whole community and connect everyone to the possibilities to be the best that they can be, and giving them those tools. So it's basically another slide which I'm going to show. As we run out of time, is basically the fact that the sustainable development goals that we're already pushing towards, in the end, they're all connected to energy. Can you see the slide?
Not yet. Whatever it was that you did last time worked really nicely.
Let me try again. Share. All right.
It's curious what you say about there being access to, all the different kinds of resources that we use, and that having these sorts of off-grid solutions, but microgeneration at a local level, can give people the connection that that they may well use to improve their businesses. And what's stopping anybody being connected across this global grid that we've created and generated? So there is really fascinating opportunity, I think, that we've got there. Tell us.
So yeah, I mean, the opportunity is really exciting. Can you see the slide now?
Yes, it's on
Okay,
the
great.
screen.
Yeah, so it's since 2015, last 5 years, the world's been talking about these sustainable development goals, and you know, it's quite important to figure out how we can um, help the whole world really be in a place where these goals are basically met. And the world is already connected to a huge extent. Apart from, I guess, a few billion, the vast majority of people across the world are connected to the web, you know, the online network. And ultimately, the greater the pool from which one gets to choose from, the greater the opportunity to kind of get the best solutions out there, to get the best options out there, and really make everything work much better. So really, what we see is just what we see here is that by making sure the energy that's needed to help each of these goals, be reached, is available everywhere where it's needed. I mean, it will take the effort of everyone in the industry and many others in other industries to start thinking, how can we do what we do more efficiently? How can we shift from, if we're an NGO in a refugee environment, how can we shift from using fossil fuels to using renewable energies? How can we shift if we're shipping things across the world? How can we figure out how to source more product at site, and reduce the carbon footprint and so on and so forth. So there is so much that can be realized, and it is a win-win for the whole world, because when cost of production goes down, prices can go down, profits can go up, and can be shared more equally. And when income levels go up, you think about taking the idea of Ford, and how Ford back many years ago thought, what if the Ford car could be afforded by anyone who worked at Ford? And that's the same kind of idea, which when you look at, the few billion that could then go online, if you think about everyone who's currently living below the poverty line, when they go above that poverty line, think about what will happen to the economy and the opportunities that come out of there when their purchasing power goes up, when they can actually, be part of that ecosystem, when they can be suppliers to people like Coca-Cola, like Diageo, where they can be suppliers, to the factories that supply people like KFC and so on and so forth. It is possible to have the corporate world and the base of pyramid world actually connect, and everyone wins. And when the people at the base of the pyramid are brought up above that level that we call poverty, the economy itself goes forward, and the markets will be really happy about it. But more crucially, we'll be able to hit all these 17 goals without too much of an issue.
I think that's my biggest challenge as well. It's this, one SDG at the cost of the rest. I know that so many of them have to work together in order for there to be a foundation upon which we grow. It's a foundation. It's not a goal, right? Like, we should almost take that word goal out, because that makes it, an aspiration. It means like we're going in that direction. Yes, we are. But if it's not there already, then many of them, almost behave as if it's like one day when we'll get, the women sorted, we'll get the energy sorted. And it kind of feels like I'm going to feed myself, but I'm not going to give myself clothes. There's such a holistic approach to this that it kind of reminds me of the LEED Platinum. I remember we were challenging a company for the designs of LEED Platinum for a particular building. Is going to be a really big operation, and one of the pushbacks that we got from the client was that it was going to cost a huge amount of money. And we said, well, your long-term maintenance is actually going to come down, and you're expecting to pay something close to, I think it was like 25 to 40 million a year just in maintaining this building. So how much is it going to cost you to increase the opportunities that you have in the built environment, to improve the experience and use the LEED Platinum as a basis through which you then, innovate? But that was the ceiling, right? That for their mindset was, we just have to get to platinum. What are you talking about here? We don't need to go any further than that. And for me, it's like the SDGs. We just need to get to the SDG. Just tick that off. Appreciate, have a strategy, take it on slowly, surely, but use these as a means to really innovate beyond, rather than the goal too, and that's it, we're done. So coming back to, we're kind of coming to the end of our time together, but I really wanted to show and share actually some of the comments from our audience, and one in particular from Thomas Duffy was, and I'll just quickly read it out. The biggest challenges relate to vampire capitalists, aka those who know there's money in them hills and are setting out to get it without care for its purpose. This risks funding initiatives in being misappropriated or exploited, ultimately reducing, somehow sort of like moved on to the next one before I finished reading it. But I think it's sort of like a really fascinating, opportunity for us to understand where those penalties lie in creating, systems and infrastructure and changes that can actually help and develop, safety measures. I mean, if you were to look at the rent measures in a Paris, there is, there's a certain amount of rent that you can confirm anyone can actually pay in the inner city of Paris. And after that, those rent controls, save people from being, completely ripped off. So in so many ways, I think there is an opportunity to move beyond what is the kind of like the image and, constructs that have been created, especially in, I think this identity, I think that we sometimes fall into, which is controlling the narrative and controlling the economics of allowing people to have control over their own lives with no strings attached at all. Without this method and an idea that, oh, we're going to give you this energy, but at the cost of, it's moving away from this at the cost of, dangling a carrot and hoping that people will have that level of wherewithal to know that there are no strings attached to the technologies that they're using, and that they have the authority and they are empowered enough to feel the strength in the work that they're doing. So I think it's a really big challenge. I think the work that you're doing is really quite phenomenal. Thank you so much for joining us for this live. I wanted to share how people can get in contact with you through, I believe it's Twitter, your website as well, and an opportunity really to sort of ask you the kind of questions that allow us to go beyond what we think is good for people, and actually ask them, how can we best help support you? So finally, any asks that you have of our audience? Is there something that you'd really like help with, or something that you're working on right now, or like to bring people's attention to?
Awesome, thank you very much. Yeah, so I'd really like to thank everyone who's watching us now and who will watch us later. It's great to be able to talk to you all. I'd say think beyond, beyond the comfort zone. Look out and see what's going on around the world. If you follow what we are doing, I'd say definitely it's worth checking out what we're doing in the refugee space, especially with clean cooking, where we've got working closely with a platform called WREN, WREN in Silicon Valley. So there is a clean cooking project out there called Clean Cooking for Refugees on the WREN platform. And yeah, we'd love everyone to kind of check it out and see what we are doing there. We're basically trying to show that it is possible to have countries where refugees live, like Uganda, where refugees are hosted, say close to 5% of the population, are refugees now, and if they can move from firewood to clean cooking fuels, and that can make a dent, help make a dent on the issues we're having with climate change. And when 1.5 million people potentially move off firewood to cleaner cooking fuels from residues from the plots that they are given to grow their crops, because refugees in Uganda are given plots to grow crops, and the waste from those crops can be transformed into the clean cooking that they use. So we're working close with the UNHCR on that. So yeah, people can read more about it on the Project Ren platform. So you can Google Project Ren clean cooking for refugees. So that'll give people a good idea about that. But overall, anyone who's out there working on anything, I'd say, yeah, it is possible. Whatever you're doing, no matter how complicated it seems, no matter how costly it seems, there is always a way, to make it work in those parts of the world which, we feel may need the most basic help. But let's not think about, people around the world needing the most basic. Let's think about them needing, exactly what we have. Let me think about the time I lived in Pimlico. Let me think about someone, in Paluga in northern Uganda, accessing the exact same amenities, the exact same amount of electricity, the exact same lifestyle as I did in Pimlico. It is possible. And when we kind of move from a mindset of, let people have the minimum to let people have the opportunity to be the best that they can be, to contribute to what the world can be, it's the ultimate win-win, for the world, for the economy, and for the climate and the universe. So yeah, and exciting to see your NASA Cup as well. It's it makes me think back to my aerospace days. Yes.
I made, I believe it was last year, to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. Peter, an absolute pleasure to have you, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing. It's really inspirational for me, and I'm glad that you shared it to our audience, who can follow up with a variety of different, engagement through your website and get in contact with you on Twitter, and also learn about your Project Ren. So thank you very much for being on our show.
Thank you so much. Much joy.
Thank you. So replenishing Earth starts with the smallest of actions, and you too can become a replenisher. Today, we have our second day of the Rise to Replenish Challenge, and please join the momentum. Today's theme is microgreens, growing your own food. And today I pledge to nurture and grow more greens around me. With our social media handles and a variety of different posts that we've got, you can learn about what you can do at home, and you can check these out at Replenish Earth on Instagram as well as Twitter, and on our Facebook as well, on our Facebook page. There are also prizes to be won. So if you join the challenge today and every day, you can kind of retrospectively go over day 1, 2, or as you wish. Do it in the order that you like. But if you let us know that, then you will be in for prizes. And for some prizes, the prize that we're offering for today's session is a workshop. So we're going to be offering a 2-hour workshop on how you can create amazing ways to replenish Earth from home. So without further ado, thank you all very much for your time. Please leave your suggestions, comments, questions in our comment box, and please let us know what you thought about today's session. And if there are any other areas and aspects that you'd like us to cover, we've got a number of speakers. Please check them out. We'll be going live in, I believe, a couple of hours now. So looking forward to that. Thank you very much for your time, and see you very soon.